Good evening, and thank you for your patience. Let's get started. So today we'll be learning about intergroup development, and our reading was chapter 11 of our textbook, Experiential Approach to Organizational Development. So last class, we learned about teams. Teams are the fundamental building block of the organization in terms of people working together. I think you could also say that an individual is maybe the fundamental building block, but many tasks require groups to work together. But now, okay, you have teams. Well, teams have to work with other teams. And a team is a low level of group, but there might be several teams that are working together in a department, and there might be several departments under one division. You get the idea. So a large organization is going to be broken down into subunits, departments, divisions, down to teams, and they have to work together in order to achieve organizational goals. So when we were talking about teams, we talked about how individuals have to subordinate their personal desires and drives and for the good of the team, because you're achieving the team goal. Well, same thing with teams and the organizations. Teams themselves all have to be working towards organizational goals. And there can be problems when a team starts to, let's say, get very powerful, and the members of the group are concerned about their own position and status, and they actually start to maybe compete with other teams, and all of that can really undermine organizational goals. So the bottom line is that all teams should be working within each other, and they should be working with other teams in order to achieve organizational goals. And many groups rely on each other in order to get things done. So marketing can't do its job unless it's chalked to communications, and they have to be working with production or development. You get the idea, right? So groups rely on each other in order to get their own work done and to achieve organizational goals. But in practice, in organizations, we can see a lot of dysfunctional siloing, where groups are kind of doing their own thing and operating without enough feedback from the other teams that they are working with. The points at which teams intersect with other teams, or groups intersect with other groups, are called interfaces. And managers need to know how to operate in an interdepartmental environment. The department level is a fairly high level, but there's levels over that and levels of group below that. And can you see how complex the job of the manager is, considering all these different groups and how they work together or don't? One role for the OD practitioner is to intervene in order to help teams work together more effectively. When groups aren't working together effectively, when they optimize their own goals, but they compromise the good of the organization, we call that suboptimization. And suboptimization happens when you see groups that have conflicting purposes or objectives. And this is a major source of inefficiency, because people are spending time on dysfunctional conflict instead of getting work done. Here's an example of siloing from your textbook, and maybe this is something that you've experienced before. So they say that customers all too frequently go to a business, a government agency, or some other type of organization seeking help with a problem, and they're shunted back and forth among departments, with each employee saying, "It's not my job. You need to see someone else," maybe mentioning another department. Have you ever been given the bureaucratic runaround like that? These situations can be very frustrating, and one may wonder whether these people ever talk to one another. As a result, the organization may lose business to a competitor. Employees of an organization who are trying to resolve a problem or simply do their job also get the bureaucratic runaround from other employees. These are operating problems that often lead to intergroup conflict. This kind of thing happens when everyone is really trying to do their job in good faith, but the system as a whole isn't well designed, or maybe their job descriptions aren't broad enough for what they're actually asked to do. And so the person just, they have to do their job, and you come with a problem, and maybe only there's a piece of your problem that they can look at, because otherwise, you know, it's not their job to do that. But is there someone else whose job is that? Whose job that is? Students who experience discrimination or harassment talk to many different people in an organization when they're trying to deal with that. So they might talk to a personal counselor, a career counselor, or maybe even a doctor at health services. They might talk to their instructor or the TA. They might talk to somebody with some kind of EDIA office. So maybe the accessibility advisor or Black or Indigenous student advisor. They might talk to peer coaches. They might talk to someone in HR if they're trying to report an employee. They might talk to peer coaches, and they might, if they go to HR, the next thing that might happen is that their case is referred to the university lawyer. And all of those offices have different roles and responsibilities and different interests. And there's no one sort of case manager that has that overall perspective. The student does, though. And this can lead to a Kafkaesque experience for the student, because things are so siloed that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. There's no sort of overall case management. And every office has its little scope of practice and its own political context. So the faculty and the TA are responsible for teaching, right? Staff have their own job descriptions. Counselors who know maybe your whole stories, well, they can't talk about what you said to them, like unless you're going to kill yourself or go postal. Student advisors have no power to change the system. Notice that a lot of those EDIA roles, like Black student advisor, Indigenous student advisor, disability advisors, they're all student advisors. Okay, when an organization is really serious about EDIA, those positions aren't just about students, they're about the whole organization, and they report to somebody really high level, right? They're not that far down the ranks where there's several managers up to the president. Ideally, you want to see reporting directly to the president. Anyway, they have no power to change the system. The administrators are expected to protect the institution, and legal services helps them do that. In many organizations, I think much more so in academic organizations, HR is often professionally disregarded, disempowered, kind of a servant of power. And so the sum total experience of reporting for a student can be, well, unfortunate, to put it diplomatically. Here's another example of siloing, and this is in manufacturing to the point that they don't have a product that works. General Motors, before its reorganization, had significant problems of suboptimization. Its engineering and production divisions were so autonomous they did not interface except through the president. A car body would be designed to meet appearance and safety requirements, but could not be manufactured because of the physical limitations of stamping or bending metal. So the people who are coming up with car design, making it really cool, don't know about how you make stuff. The design would have to be sent back to engineering to be redone. The CEO at the time described the process. So guys in Fisher Body would draw up the body and send the blueprint over and say, okay, build this if you can. And then the person in production would say, there's no way you can stamp metal like that. There's no way we can weld this stuff together. That's a good example of the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And they have such different competencies and they can't work together. They can't even come up with a product that works. Boundarylessness is a term that comes up in your textbook. And I find this idea quite vague and abstract. What does boundarylessness means? General Electric reduces the conflict between operating divisions, departments, and teams by subscribing to interdependent teams and emphasizing the concept of being boundaryless. CEO Jack Welch says that being boundaryless is an open, trusting sharing of ideas, a willingness to listen, debate, and then take the best ideas and get on with it. If this company is to achieve its goals, we've all got to become boundaryless. Trip over my tongue when I say that word, boundaryless. Boundaries are crazy. There's some hyperbole or metaphorical speech here. I'm getting a sense of organizational culture here that, you know, it's okay to talk to people across these divisions, and we should, and confrontation's okay. Let's get to the bottom of this so that we can come up with the best product. That sounds like culture to me, but you cannot have an organization without boundaries, right? Boundaries on people's roles and responsibilities. Organizational policies prescribe boundaries. You can't have any coherent organizational structure without boundaries. In career, vocational psychology, boundarylessness refers to career as transcending the structure of an organization. So your career may span multiple departments within a single organization, occur across multiple organizations, proceed outside of any organization. It reminds me of SMU's new motto, world without limits. What does that actually mean? You can't live without limits. The world has lots of limits. Limits can be healthy. So this is almost more of an attitude than something that really makes a lot of concrete sense. So you learned in, I think it was chapter 2, that management role in the sociotechnical system is to coordinate all the other subsystems toward achieving organizational goals. That's an ideal. But we can ask questions like, what does the good of the organization mean? What is that? Can you see how different stakeholders might have different ideas of what that means? Maybe the employees would say, well, it should be a psychologically healthy workplace and we should get high pay. And maybe managers would say, we give, a lot of productivity. We make a lot of profit. Maybe the shareholders think that means that their value of the stocks are going up. So we use terms like the organization and the good of the organization, sometimes without really thinking about what those words mean. And now let's even ask what is the organization? So the definition of an organization, it's an entity consisting of one or more persons with a particular goal, maybe set of goals with a purpose. People with a purpose. But the organization, like when we talk about, say, SMU, we reify that concept. It's an abstraction, but we talk about SMU or Kleenex or General Electric as if it were a person with a brain and feelings. And we say the organization values, and employees wonder if the organization cares, and it can't. This is not a person with a brain. And when we talk about organizations like that, what do we really mean? Well, what we often we're really referring to is a small group of people at the top of a hierarchical organization and what they collectively think and do and feel. And that becomes organizational culture for everyone else. Industrial psychologist Arthur Kornhauser argued back in 1947 that management is actually a special interest group. So there might be a class of people, managers might be a class of people, and they have more power, and they might run things in a way that privileges themselves. So do they earn a lot more money than other people? And how do you justify that? Do they have a lot more power? Is it possible for them to get away with things that people lower down in the organization wouldn't get away with? Something to think about. Conflict, and I don't want you to think about conflict and collaboration as if conflict is bad and collaboration is good. I'm trying to get out of that way of thinking, because whether something is bad or good is really more about whether it's adaptive or maladaptive given a certain goal. And then you can ask, is that a good goal? And who gets to decide that that's a good goal? So there is a role for conflict in an organization that can be adaptive. Conflict can also be mismanaged and become maladaptive. And then collaboration can be very adaptive, especially when you need to solve complex problems. But we know from last class that it can also, waste a lot of time. Like sometimes you don't need a team to solve a certain problem. And it can lead to groupthink. So think of collaboration and conflict as tools that can be applied well or can be applied poorly. Conflict is inevitable between groups. That's just life. There's always going to be differences in objectives, differences in values, differences in interests, differences in perspective, and different groups come with different levels of power, and that complicates things. Now, I've just talked to you about managers as if management was a monolith, and in reality, it's not. Managers are individual people, and there are social networks within management. So maybe this group of managers works together and they don't like that group of managers. And managers compete with each other as individuals, and as cliques, they compete with other groups of managers for power and position in the organization. And a manager will have his turf. The textbook uses the term fiefdom. Talk about political empires. They have their budgets, they have their people, they have their big office and their assistants and their sense of importance. And they can have these little wars with each other. So sometimes when two teams are in conflict, it might really be because two team leaders or managers are in conflict. And they might use their own resources to undermine each other. One of them can climb over the others. Remember Parkinson's law of inefficiency, the law of the multiplication of subordinates. That says that if a manager has too many subordinates, and it might be better for this employee to be managed by somebody else because you don't have the time for this, he still doesn't want to give up that person because that might be empowering the other manager, a rival organization member. OD hopes to reduce dysfunctional conflict through intergroup interventions. I added the word hopefully because the original version of this slide said dysfunctional conflict is reduced through intergroup interventions. But we know that sometimes in interventions, even ones that are made in good faith or ones that look good on paper, can actually be ineffective, wasteful, or harmful. But we hope to reduce this dysfunctional conflict. Here's something that I found in your textbook that I thought was quite funny. And it's funny because it's true. And it's talking about hostilities between groups. And maybe there's going to be a winner or a loser. And they say that the losing group might want to get back, feel compelled to revise the power balance. It may try to manipulate the situation by means of delaying tactics or by insisting on adherence to policies and procedures. We know that organizational policies can be performative. They might look good on paper, they might look good to the customer or to employees, but in practice, policies can actually be bad, they can be inefficient, they can just be part of just smoke and mirrors. So given that, one way to undermine your enemies is to actually follow the policies and procedures. All right, let's talk about operating problems between groups. Textbook says that two major factors are the compatibility of the goals and the extent to which resources are scarce and shared? Are we competing over resources? And the degree of interdependence on task activities. Sometimes there's a little conflict between groups because they're not working together. So are the computer programmers going to have a conflict with the janitors? Probably not. But the computer programmers might have some conflict with, I don't know, the designers, because there's more interdependence of their tasks. So there's low potential for conflict when there's low interdependence, when goals aren't in conflict, and when we're not competing for resources. A high conflict potential situation is when you are competing over resources, like budget, and where you have different goals, but you need to work together. That's a high conflict situation. Sometimes people are members of more than one team or more than one group at the same time. And you can have conflict when somebody belongs to two or more groups whose goals are in conflict. But that can be helpful. Like if you have a person be a member of two different groups that are normally in conflict, by being a member of both, you might start to learn about the other side, and you might start to see their different perspective, and that can help sort of stereotyping and some of the dysfunctional things that happen when we develop these us and them relationships. I have, I'd say, a different perspective than some instructors, because I'm also a student, and I'm a student and a teacher at the same time. And so I understand some student issues, and I kind of get it, not just looking at students from a faculty perspective. And then I can also understand some of the pressures and issues and things that faculty are under. And I think it has broadened my perspective a lot. Roles may not be respected by other groups. There are power differences between groups in organizations. One thing that I see in many organizations, definitely in academic organizations, is that management may disempower or disrespect HR. That's when HR works for management, and management really wants to make all the staffing and hiring decisions and decide when and whether and how policy is implemented, and they just see HR as paper and keeping the peace. I'm a big believer in the importance of HR. HR being empowered and professional, doing its job in a way that's respected, can make for a really psychologically healthy workplace. When they're doing consultations, they're doing it properly, and they're sharing that information back to management's listening. This could be really beautiful. And then I've seen that the Kafkaesque hell that people go through when they're in an organization where HR is just the servant to power, and where policies will not be followed, and where processes are biased, and where you think you're talking to somebody that might help you and they actually throw you under the bus, and where tools like, say, coaching are used in an inappropriate way, where privacy is violated. So I'm a big believer in HR. I'm an HR consultant, but management has to respect HR. In the academic context, I've noticed that faculty tend to not respect staff very well. So the faculty might feel like they're the all-important ones who know everything, because if you have a PhD in one thing, you know everything. But in reality, staff have very important roles, and sometimes we just kind of disregard them, and that makes it hard for them to do their jobs. Cooperation versus competition. Okay, so this slide is a Virgin textbook publisher PowerPoint deck slide. I left it like that because I wanted you to see it. It reflects what's in your book. And to me, this shows a lack of understanding of adaptivism. That's not the perspective of the textbook, it's my perspective that I teach from. So the book is asking the question, well, is competition bad or good? And is cooperation bad or good? That's the wrong question. And it doesn't consider context. And they get confused about mixed research results because they aren't considering the context. Then in some contexts, competition gets you what you want, right? Sometimes maybe different teams could compete against each other. I don't know what circumstances to come up with the best product, and maybe that forms the best product. And then there's times when you have complex, messy social problems where you need to bring all these different teams together to solve it. They have this thing about self-esteem too. I'm not into the concept. They're saying that, okay, so if you members of competitive groups feel like they have more esteem for their in-group, is that a good thing? Why should I think that high group self-esteem is a good thing? Where did that come from? They're more task-oriented. Why is that a good thing? If your task orientation helps achieve the organizational goal, that's great. But what if you're so focused on the task that you're having really messy personal relationships, and you have a dominant person that's not listening to other people, and they take people's task-based work in the wrong direction? So being task-focused isn't necessarily good. Having high self-esteem for yourself or your group members, your in-group, isn't necessarily good. Okay, we see this with sexism and racism. The dominant group thinks it's better than the other one. It's not a good thing. Maybe sometimes it is, but there just seems to be a lack of understanding here of context and goals and how you evaluate something as desirable or undesirable. It's not in the thing itself, it's in the effectiveness of the behavior, the state, or the trait towards achieving some worthy goal. And now you have your ethical debate about whether your goal is worthy. And this is another textbook publisher slide, and they say lack of evidence is the benefits of competition. And they say that cooperation promotes productivity between groups when task is complicated and requires coordination. I would say yes, for messy problems, you might need to get different people at the table, different groups at the table in order to solve it. When they say lack of evidence of benefits of competition, you always have to ask, what context are these studies done in? I'm going to keep picking on the book. This is one of those chapters. So the book also says that there are these 5 conflict styles that you need to understand. And these are produced by some 2x2 matrix based on desire to satisfy yourself versus desire to please others. When I see desire to satisfy self, I think of things like the self-focused, self-directed, disagreeable person or dominant person. When I think of a high desire to please others, I think of an agreeable person. But, serving yourself in a way that undermines the common good is a characteristic of low honesty humility. That's kind of a narcissistic thing to do. So according to the text, diagnosing conflict involves understanding these conflict styles. And so they would combine low desire to please yourself with low desire to satisfy others as avoiding. And these actually don't make too much sense to me. Okay, so they'd say that avoiding, an avoidant conflict style, is based on low concern for self and others. And what does that look like? Say it's withdrawing, passively agreeing, going along to get along, passing the buck. Passing the buck is an American idiom that means not accepting responsibility. This is someone else's problem, kind of trying to stay out of it. All of these conflict styles, including the avoidant one, could be adaptive in certain contexts. If there is some petty interpersonal drama, it might be best for you to stay out of that and not get involved. and be a little dismissive of it, because how are you going to benefit from getting involved in this? A lot of interpersonal conflict in organizations, just petty ego drama stuff. Yes.
So, like how you said, within context, but when you're like just like a general topic like this, wouldn't like the person writing the book have the intention, like of course the reader should understand to know when to apply which one?
No. So I want to repeat your question back for the folks on Zoom, and interrupt me if I didn't understand this correctly. But what I heard, what I think you said is that wouldn't the textbook authors know that all of these could be used in different circumstances and one isn't good or bad?
No.
No. So I misunderstood you. Okay, let's try this again. Let's get it right. I'm listening.
Like if I was the author, I'm writing with the idea that the reader knows that this is just a general idea, but my understanding is that they will know when to apply it to a certain context. The textbook author is making an assumption that the reader will know that they can apply this in the right context. Yeah.
I would say that psychology as a discipline struggles tremendously with understanding context or social context. And folks in psychology tend to see certain behaviors as desirable, good, positive, and other ones as negative. And I see this in management too. And that's why I'm kind of trying to make this big point about adaptivism. Where is my pen? So it was just the other day that I saw a seminar that said how to be positive in negative environments. And the first thing I want to ask is what is being positive? What does that mean? So many people, psychologists included, have talk about sort of positive, and positive psychology does this. So this is really, really common. And I find that a lot of people are struggling because of this. So this idea of positive or negative, they really kind of mean good, desirable. And they also mix that up with pleasant, like it feels good. And then there's a kind of negative. And they lump that in with kind of socially undesirable. And they're kind of getting at an idea of morally bad. They lump that in too. And they put in things that are unpleasant here. So a lot of people will come in looking for psychological services because maybe they have a sense of distress, because then they want to get rid of the distress. I once had somebody call me up and she said, I just want to feel good about myself. Okay, so the distress is negative. Conflict is negative. What else do people think is negative? Okay, and let's say deceit is negative. Is my deceit a vice if the axe murderer asks me where you're hiding? So the axe murderer comes in here and asks me where you are, and I lie to him. Is that the wrong thing to do? Because lying's bad. Should I have told him? So yeah, the location of morality, of good and bad, is not in a state trait for behavior. It's not where it exists. It might exist in how does this serve the highest good? And you can ask what that is. But anyway, so distress, pain is a good teacher, right? Like people, you think pain is negative. People want to get rid of their pain. Pain is people who genetically cannot feel pain rarely live to adulthood because they don't get any feedback from their body saying, oh, you hit that too hard. They would like maybe put their hand down, not know how much force to use and break their bone. And then they don't know that they've broken a bone and gets infected. They don't know because they don't feel it hurting. One of them, I can't remember the name of this condition, recently died because he was 17 because he jumped off a roof. Like he didn't know that you have a feeling that, okay, it's all right to jump down 2 stairs. My daughter's doing it. She's into jumping downstairs, but you know that you don't jump off a roof because you have hurt yourself before. So is pain good or bad? Well, pain is definitely unpleasant, but psychologists tend to lump, and managers lump these things together. What else do we think is? There's a whole list of things that we think are bad, and then things that we think are positive are kind of pleasure. But a life of pursuing pleasure can be incredibly harmful to other people. We think passion is positive. Well, you can have destructive passions. Following your passion in life can run yourself and your family into the ground. What if your passion is child molesting? Right? But there's this idea that, oh, you must know what your passion is. Fine, sure. What else do we think is positive? Harmony. Well, too much harmony can lead to groupthink and these disasters. And people are all going along to get along. That's not necessarily a good thing. So goodness and badness have to be located outside of this. But you'll find many people with PhDs, many people writing books, not understanding these distinctions. So what else? Pleasure, passion, harmony. Addicts like to get pleasure from their highs. It's not a good thing. So this confounding is psychology is rife with it. So what you'll kind of hear in the book is that an avoiding style is kind of bad, right? Withdrawing, passively agreeing. Passing the buck has a negative connotation to it. But in reality, there's times when you do want to avoid a conflict. And I'll take it out of the management organizational situation. But what if your ex-boyfriend wants to talk about why you broke up? Maybe it's not the best thing to have that conversation. Like sometimes like letting go is actually better. Like dragging up everything is not necessarily good. They say that that's based on low concern for self and low concern for others. I don't buy that. Avoiding a conflict might be the best thing for you, might be the best thing for others, depending on the context. Okay, then they have the obliging style. And I say the obliging style is based on low concern for self. What does that mean? You don't care about yourself, you'll destroy yourself, or you're really humble. And high concern for others. So I want to be agreeable and please you. And they describe that as people pleasing, looking for harmony, smoothing over conflict. Sometimes that's the wrong thing to do. When you have an abusive boss, pleasing that person is not good for you or anyone else. But sometimes being obliging is a great thing to do, right? Sometimes harmonizing is a great skill. Sometimes, let's say that there's some trivial thing and it doesn't mean much to you and it's not going to be destructive, but it could mean a lot to someone else and really get you in their good books, win their favor. Yeah, go ahead and oblige. And then another thing I want to draw your attention to, when they say others, who do they mean by others? It sounds like a universal everyone else, but in reality, an organization, a workplace, isn't just a social space where everyone's equals. There's groups, there's cliques, some people have more power than others. And in reality, humans tend to treat their kings very well. And that often means obliging and ingratiating yourselves with those who have power. Okay, most societies in the world everywhere treat those who can do something for us very well. And so the best measure of character, it is argued, is not how you treat your kings, but it's how you treat the people that you would feel entitled to treat the worst and who can do nothing for you. Your prisoners, your sick, the disease. How do you treat them? Okay, but there's this mystical others, as if there were no such distinctions, but there are, and they do matter. All right, dominating. Saying dominating comes from a place of high concern for self and low concern for others. It's doing things like attaining personal objectives at the expense of others. That sounds exploitative. Forcing win-lose situations. Going to disagree with that again, because that sounds a little bit narcissistic. It sounds like it's that common confounding of narcissism and disagreeableness. Somebody who's dominating, right? Someone who's a dominant personality or disagreeable personality can still be very ethical, right? You can have a combination of low agreeableness and high honesty, humility. I mean, heck, like I'm thinking about Jesus now, when didn't he sort of call people hypocrites and knock over tables, right? So being exploitative and harming others is different from being dominant. And there are some situations in which the authoritarian or dominant response is actually the best. And that's when there is a clear right way to do things. And you just need to go do that and not talk about it and not have conflicts or discussions about it. So Zelensky out there in the Ukraine, those soldiers are all following the orders of their commanders and their commanders in chief, because there's a right way to do military operations and there's a wrong way to do them, and the stakes are too high and there's no time, and you're not going to write in your journals and discuss it. You just have to go and trust that that's the right thing. And that's why you have to have competent leaders who are also caring and ethical. But then dominating can be wrong. Like when the dominant person isn't competent, caring, or ethical, that's bad experience, and that results in bad outcomes. Compromising is what they put in the middle, kind of the midpoint of both those dimensions. And they say that comes from moderate concern for self and others, and you try to find compromise. I don't necessarily see how these styles necessarily flow from the two factors. But the idea of compromising is that nobody's going to get everything they want, but everyone's kind of going to be okay with it. Maybe we can go ahead with that. Sounds like it could be great to me. And maybe that would be the way to solve the problem. Like if everybody is being treated fairly, if everyone has a legitimate concern, maybe not everyone gets everything they want, but they all get something, and it's enough, and we're all kind of satisfied. That can be fun. Compromising is bad when you are pleasing somebody who's unreasonable and you are doing something unethical because of your compromise. And I see that here. Sometimes I see managers who know that there's a lot of dysfunction in the system, or they know there's actually there's corruption, and they'll do that, look the other way, sweep it under the rug kind of thing. And they'll say, oh, well, everyone has different perspectives. And I'm going to be like, no, that person was actually lying. That's not a difference in perspective. But you kind of do that thing. They'll sort of say, well, you need the goodwill of others to get things done. But what do you have to do in order to get that person's goodwill? It's let them off the hook for something that they shouldn't be let off the hook for. And now that buys their favor. Now you can do the thing. See what I mean? So there's some slimy political stuff that can happen when you're compromising on values that should matter. All right, last one, integrating. And the textbook is kind of positioning this as the ideal, right? You have high concern for yourself and high concern for others. And we use openness and sharing and caring, and we confront our conflicts and we examine our differences and we reach a consensus. And that sounds beautiful, and sure, that can work in a safe space where you are safe to be open and share. You won't be retaliated against. But the OD practitioner goes in and sees this person that doesn't want to care and share and says, that person doesn't take personal responsibility for their behavior. No understanding of the context or the system that can make this person become apathetic or not want to share or clam up. I see that lack of context there. Anyway, so this is the OD ideal, but it's only going to work in certain contexts where it's safe, where you have all the time to do this, and you have the kind of problem that needs this collaborative solution. It's not the kind of problem that would do better with an authoritative approach. So the textbook offers you some techniques to deal with intergroup problems. And I found a couple of them interesting, and one of them a little inscrutable. I even brought my textbook with me so I could read over it. So The position of OD, which I'm reifying as if it were a person with a brain, textbook authors, the people with brains that are writing this, they like the idea of dealing with conflicts openly to manage the tension. Okay, there's some tension, let's all just talk about it. Why can't we do that? You know, I have tried to do this with groups, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it's gone badly and made everyone awkward and uncomfortable. And I'm glad I know that from experience. Otherwise, I would just believe that we should always just air our conflicts. So this idea of dealing openly with conflict, I highlight this in yellow because it's my own edition. It assumes a safe space for discussion. It assumes that you have the time for discussion, that there will be no retaliation against you for saying something, that you don't need to pander to, let's say that the person that's leading the groups are managers. Well, if you're in the group, maybe you feel like you need to please your manager because that person can fire you, right? It assumes that you've done the team development, the team building in both groups. So both groups are functioning well before you put them together to solve their mutual conflicts. Sometimes there's a conflict between groups because both of the groups are messed up. So you kind of have to fix your own business, then see how you work together. And now you really have a problem with the other group, then come together and fix that. And that's why chapter 10 comes before chapter 11. Intragroup development, team development comes before intergroup development between teams. It also assumes that the groups have some kind of training on negotiation. Like, we're gonna throw people into these situations where they discuss what they don't like about each other, and are they gonna do that well? You're also assuming that the facilitator has good process skills and that they have a sense of professional ethics. There are a lot of assumptions here. Anyway, so these techniques include third-party consultation, the organization mirror, and intergroup team building. There's that assumption that discussing conflict, airing conflict is always good, right? We must dredge this up and resolve it. Work groups are not families, they're not friend groups. They're there to get a job done. And so if the conflict is preventing people from achieving the goals, then you need to talk about it. Or if it's slowing you down from achieving the goals, then you need to talk about it. But if the group is achieving its goals, you don't want to drag skeletons out of the closet. I don't think that would make sense. But the way the book talks about it is as if it were a good thing. And, you know, I think this addresses your question, right? So here, the way they're presenting this as if it were always a good thing. They say, dealing with conflicts openly provides a way to manage tensions creatively, whereas unresolved conflict usually erodes the effectiveness of the organization. It's like an 800-pound gorilla in the room whose presence no one acknowledges. And that is kind of positioning unresolved conflict as bad, and dragging up and dealing with and exposing and confronting conflict is good. And you know, I don't like that. Sometimes it's adaptive to air a conflict, and sometimes it's more adaptive to let it go and not go there and not talk about that and get everyone focused on the goal. And sometimes you have to pull people out of those weeds and get them focusing on the goal again. You might say something like, well, you know, it's okay to agree to disagree, or we'll just have to let that one go. They say the OD practitioner deals with intergroup conflict by seeking interventions that increase interaction. Increasing interaction, increasing communication isn't necessarily a good thing. It's only good if it brings you closer to achieving your goals, or to do that more effectively, makes you more productive. Otherwise, just talking more, just interacting more isn't necessarily helpful, isn't necessarily adaptive. Like, if I made you write let's say, so I want a 1-page reflection for those of you doing the bonus points activity. Would it be better if I made you write a 3-page reflection? Well, if it's better, why don't I make you write a 300-page reflection? Seeking interventions that increase interaction, increase negotiation. You only need to do a negotiation if there's something you need to resolve. And have more frequent communications between groups. More frequent communication isn't necessarily better. You might be talking too much about things that aren't important to the point that it's derailing you from achieving your goals. And I think the wise practitioner, the wise manager, keeps that goal in sight and thinks, okay, what do we need more of and what do we need less of in order to get you into, well, as a vocational psychologist would say, into full career. Okay? When you're going down your path as fast as you can. There are risks to bringing up conflicts, and so you want to talk about a conflict if it's preventing you from achieving a goal. But a lot of the conflicts I see in organizations are personal, kind of petty. They might seem really important to the people that are having the conflict, but not to other people. Sometimes they're kind of trivial. And sometimes I have seen practitioners talk about stuff in a way that is actually like a violation of somebody's rights, of HR process or privacy. So one thing that was actually talked about as if it were a good thing in a class I took here in IO psychology. It was in a class I took for my PhD program. And a couple of the professors here were at that meeting. And there was a meeting about how there's some toxic employee. You know, all these people from us with a hospital, they had been asked as consultants to come to this meeting. So they come to this meeting as consultants. They're sitting there listening to all these people slag some employee, talk about how terrible and toxic they are. And when somebody's behaving in a way that is problematic, you know, how much of that is their toxic trait and how much of that is the pressure they're under? What's the role of the system there? Is that person being scapegoated? Like I have seen people be actually lied about because somebody's angry that they were hurt by their boss, but now, you know, we can feel better by accusing this person of it. And that person's not there at that meeting. They don't know that it's happening about it. And there's these two IO psychologists who think they're experts at psychologically healthy workplaces, right? Are they listening to this, to something about this person, and the person's not there. Is that right? It's probably a privacy violation, but the person wouldn't even know. And apparently, so the professor was saying was that this other professor was there, very high ranking, very highly regarded, very well thought. I said, well, why don't you fire the person? That is stage 5 of constructive dismissal. Those profs were involved in an organizational mobbing, and they're supposed to be experts on IO psychology and psychologically healthy workplaces. And that person just, with their authority, said, why don't you fire that person? Without even talking to them, without even seeing them, but just being in this meeting where someone's getting trashed behind their back. Like that is just not ethical. And so, yeah, there's a lot of issues in the discipline, and many experts will tell you things from a place of expertise that, well, I hope you keep your critical thinking hat on. So I don't think that kind of meeting to resolve conflict would be helpful in any way. I would be very concerned about the employee who is being talked about. And I want to know, where is HR? How did that meeting happen? What are they going to hear about it? They even have the chance to defend themselves. Okay. The book says something else that I think is actually wrong based on social psychology research. So what do they say here? The OD strategies for dealing with intergroup conflicts that inhibit cooperation have several goals. OD intergroup techniques seek to identify areas of commonality and meta goals, superordinate organizational goals that everyone should be working together on. These techniques aim at avoiding win-lose situations while emphasizing win-win aspects of the situation. They encourage interaction and negotiation and increased frequency of communication. Doing it again. Frequent contacts between groups reduce the degree of conflict. No, that is not what we know from social psychology. So if you have two groups that have some kind of conflict, just increasing the frequency of contact between them does not necessarily make anything better. I don't know, having the Israelis have more contact with Palestinians, not necessarily going to go anywhere good. They say that's because intergroup contacts help reduce biases, encourage external loyalties, make group membership less important, weaken the pressures for conformity to group norms. Okay, getting to know another group, spending time with them, you know, might help you unlearn some things, maybe. But you guys remember intro psych, the Robbers Cave experiment? Remember what the psychologists did there? They had a group of pretty homogenous, young white boys from the suburbs, and they randomly assigned them to two groups. There was the rattlesnakes, and I can't remember the other group. So two groups, and they got these two groups of similar boys to absolutely hate each other by getting them to compete. And they would, so they'd have like tug of war, they'd have this, they'd have that, and then they got into all kinds of nasty bullying, and rating each other, and things escalated to the point that the researchers were concerned. And then toward the end of the experiment, we had to send them home. They were getting really concerned because they tried to come in there and tell them that, you know, that we should like each other, we should be nice, you know, that kind of thing. Kind of like when somebody goes into a school to talk about how bullying is bad. It didn't work. It didn't work. Increasing just the frequency of contact did not work. They found that one thing worked, and it was getting the groups to work together on a common goal. So the researchers made some fake problem, like there was some problem with the water tank, and the groups had to work together in order to solve the problem. That's what works. And then applied psychologists learned from that to help children of different races integrate, because in the southern states in the United States, there used to be different schools for white kids and different schools for Black kids. And then sometime was it the 60s, the law changed. You had to put these kids together. Uh-oh, how are you going to do that? And learning from this research, psychologists came up with something called jigsaw classrooms. And in the jigsaw classroom, in order for the kids to get through the day, to learn, they had to solve problems together. So they gave each child a piece of information that had to come together in order to complete a task. And they got these kids making friends with each other, playing on the playground in 6 weeks. But the bottom line is that it's not just frequency of contact. It's not just more communication. If you want to get groups to start to like each other, you need to have them working on common goals, and they both contribute their skills. They're both happy when they start achieving the goals. Maybe they'll start appreciating each other. Right? That's what it takes. And I'm not seeing that understanding here. But this book is actually not written by psychologists. It's written by, I think, who's it written by? Written by Donald R. Brown. He's from Antelope Valley College, community college in the States. And his area is management. But this is not a psychology textbook. And organizational development is a field that kind of falls under IO psychology, but maybe falls more under the organizational behavior field of management. And management's an interdisciplinary field. Psychology is science. Management is not. You could say it's more of an art. So I think we're lacking some psychology knowledge here. Okay. So there are some things that managers or practitioners can do. And I felt myself going, ooh, when I put the slash there, it's manager / practitioner, because a manager has a different role in an organization, has power. A practitioner doesn't, right? External practitioners have no power except to influence managers and people in general. And internal practitioners are subject to internal politics. But what are the things that should happen? Well, reward groups for working together. Have them work on common goals, organizational goals. try to recognize and manage power differences. What that means in practice is that, well, you have to be aware of power differences. A lot of people aren't. A lot of privileged people, including the privileged people who write textbooks and teach courses and have PhDs, are quite power blind because they have power. And when you have power, it's really hard to see. You can't see the forest for the trees. But let's say you learned that skill. Well, then you might want to think of ways that you could kind of support or say advocate for the lower power group. You cannot expect openness if you as management have not created a safe space for openness. There can't be retaliation. But in practice, sometimes there is. Some people are very scared to speak in these forums because they don't know what's going to happen to them if they say something. And maybe the managers say, well, I'm not punishing you for that, but they'll find something else to get you for. And then the book says that they should maintain an appropriate level of tension. So if you, as the manager or the practitioner, communicate this is really important, then maybe nobody cares. But if you put a lot of stress on people to solve a problem, if you're like, this is a terrible problem and the organization will go under unless you fix it, and this is on your annual performance report. And if you put people under a lot of stress, then that can lead to unpredictable behavior. So you want to communicate that's important. We want to do this, but not freak people out. Reconciliation. Understand that reconciliation is a process. If you have two groups that were in conflict, there was hostilities, don't forget that some groups fight dirty. One group might be ready to work with the other group, doesn't mean the other group is ready for that. So one group's positive overtures must be coordinated with the other group's readiness to reciprocate. Okay, like just pushing people together isn't always the best thing to do. Okay, so they have these three methods they talk about, and one of them is third-party consultation. You can see there's a lot of yellow on that slide because there is risk here. But ideally, you have some kind of third-party, neutral, ideally an outside practitioner who's going to help these two parties come to an understanding or agreement or improve their relationship. And that person, maybe the OD consultant, is going to help open communications. Level power. How are we going to level power as an outside practitioner? Anyway, confront problems courageously, provide their diagnostic insight. What do they know as an outside practitioner? And they're going to be a source of emotional support. They're going to model those process skills. Appropriate dispute resolution, conflict resolution, is a professional competency. You can go learn this. There are professional organizations like the ADRIC is the Appropriate Dispute Resolution Institute of Canada. This isn't something that just anyone can do. The third party must be perceived. Sorry, I'm going to back up there because I don't like the order of my list. I threw this list together. So this is a professional competency. In coaching and in conflict resolution, there are a lot of bogus schools out there. Like someone goes and gets some kind of like a weekend course and you get a certificate. So you'll find a lot of certified practitioners where they're not really qualified or competent. Okay, so you want to ask, is that a credible certification? How would I know? Do they have a professional membership where you could complain to that organization? Is there any professional regulation at all? Because sometimes, I don't know, if somebody filed a complaint against me with my bogus coaching school that gave me that certificate, well, what are they going to do? Probably nothing. And even if they said something, then what? Right? Because there's no legal regulation. Psychologists are registered. So if you file a complaint with the body, it's the College of Psychology, NSBEP, the provincial one, and there was a finding against that person, well, they might not be able to practice again. It's like serious. But sometimes there's just nowhere for a complaint to go, even if you made it. And if an external or internal practitioner is working for someone with power in the organization, usually that's management. Management might have no problem at all with the fact that this person has a phony qualification and a bad process because that's working for them. Say it's a great process and you're the problem. Seen that happen. But so this is something that can be done very poorly, often is, or can be done very well. And for it to be done well, the third party has to be perceived as by both parties as neutral. You need to trust that this person is, a professional with the right qualifications, training, and that you could trust them. Often you'll find internal practitioners doing this, and you always have to remember that internal practitioners are subject to internal politics. We learned that in chapter 1, chapter 2. Remember it. Internal practitioners are subject to internal politics. HR works for management. In many organizations, management doesn't really respect HR as a profession. Okay. And so you bring a conflict to HR, you're not necessarily going to settle it in the way that is the morally right way or what you were hoping for. They settle it in a way that answers to the interests of management. If you don't think that management has your best interests at heart, don't raise your conflicts to HR if you can help it. Okay. So what's the take-home point there? This can, having a third party come in can be helpful if it's done well, but it's often not. And sometimes another thing I've seen is that sometimes if there's an outsider, the two parties or the two groups will kind of put on a performance for the outsider and try to look good to that person, and maybe they're not really telling the truth. So yes, it can help, and it can also go horribly wrong. So please be careful. Organizational mirror is the next one. And honestly, I found that one hard to understand. It's on page 303. I'm looking it up now. What does it say? So an organizational mirror is a technique designed to give work units feedback on how other elements or customers of the organization view them. Okay, we can get feedback. It's supposed to improve relationships between teams and increase effectiveness. A work team in personnel, engineering, production, accounting, or any other department that is experiencing interface problems with a related work team may initiate a feedback session. We're going to have a feedback session to hear what these other folks think of us. A practitioner or another third party obtains specific information, usually by questionnaire or interview, from other organizational groups that the work team contacts daily. Okay, so you're the practitioner and you're going to give a questionnaire to the other groups. Find out what they think of. So you give a questionnaire to group B to find out what they think of group A. So the work team, also called the host group, that's why you find group A, meets to process the feedback. What do we think of this? I have done things like this with students, and I know as the practitioner that you have to read those first, filter them, because sometimes people say nasty things that upset people. At this meeting, it's important that one or two spokespersons from each contacted group be present. Okay, so somebody from team A is there, somebody from team B is there, so that we're not just talking behind team B's back. The outside key people and the practitioner discuss the data collected in an inner circle. Who are the outside key people? I'm already getting confused. Whereas the host group fishbowls and observes from the outside. Oh, they're watching other people talk about them. Ooh, confronting. After this, the host group can ask questions that seek clarification. Why'd you say this? They're not allowed to argue or rebut. Host unit, with the assistance of the practitioner, then discusses the data to identify problems. Okay, so you're watching somebody else's perspective on your issues. Could be interesting. Subgroups are formed of the host members and key visitors to identify specific improvements that will increase operating efficiency. Afterwards, the total group, everyone comes back together, here's a summary report from each subgroup, and then they outline an action plan and make specific task assignments. This completes the meeting, but a follow-up meeting to assess progress is usually scheduled. They say that the organizational mirror provides a means for a work team to improve its operating relations with other groups. And it allows the team to obtain feedback on what it's doing, identify key problems, and search for specific ways to improve its operating efficiency. Okay, I've never tried that. I can't give you much personal insight on whether or not that works. Sounds interesting. Do you have any experience with this? Have you seen anyone do that? I've never seen it. Yeah. Okay. It was hard to understand that. Like I read that 3 times over, and I think I might have understood about 50% of it. Okay. Intergroup team building. So this is a 5-step process, and we're going to work on interface problems. And in the first step, the groups work separately. So team A and team B, they're in separate rooms, and they answer the question of, how do we see ourselves? How do we think the other group sees us? And how do we see the other team? When groups are in conflict, they tend to perceive themselves, the in-group, as good and moral and righteous, and the other group as useless and morally bankrupt. So I'd be a little concerned about what they're going to come back to the table with. What if they said, okay, how do we see the other department? Well, we think you're vacant, pompous twits who should all be fired for incompetence. So in step 2, a person, a leader from each team, they present their list. This is where I guess you insult the other team for the way you think of them. And the other group is allowed to ask clarifying questions, but not to defend, argue, or rebut. Imagine if you're sitting there like, ah! No, you're only allowed to ask clarifying questions. I wonder how this would go down in practice. Like if you're doing this as an intervention because there's hostility and conflict, this is almost assuming that everyone is very diplomatic. Okay, that's step 2. You've shared your list with each other. And then in step 3, teams go back to their separate rooms to discuss that. Then in step 4, you have cross groups. And what they're doing is they're creating subgroups by mixing members of each group to talk about action plans. What are you going to do differently? And I think that's interesting. I've never tried this, but maybe you develop better action plans when you have somebody from the team that you're in conflict with there. But you should have a follow-up meeting to see how that went. I have never done this. I've never facilitated this. I don't know if you've ever been exposed to this. Those are the steps. Does it work? The effectiveness is anecdotal. So they say that people say that this works. But anecdote is the lowest level of evidence. Okay, because you can always find somebody that's like, yes, this is great. In fact, I do it. Here are my fees. Let me tell you about all my amazing success stories. But if it went badly, who's going to talk about that? Is the manager or the organization going to publish something in their weekly newsletter that says, we had this process and it was really terrible and we all hated each other more at the end of it? Where does that information go? So you need to have nice controlled studies, the kind that maybe you could do for your honors project, but there has to be the interest to do that, maybe the funding to do that. I will say that just because there isn't a study that says something that is good or works doesn't mean that it doesn't work. The saying is the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Something could work, but we don't have any study that proves that it works. Those are different issues. But what can I say is that you haven't really done the studies, or at least hadn't done them in 2011 when this textbook was written, and it's kind of practitioner knowledge that it works. And so take it with a grain of salt. Thank you for your participation. Are there any questions or comments on that?
Um,
Yes.
The intergroup meeting. So in my organization, we kind of do something like that, but it's more like the employee should bring their issues to the management of that department. And then we could like go through those and what we said, or like if it's, like you don't want to say it to the employee directly, you go to HR and then HR will compile the list. And then,
Ooh, it's like a chain.
yes,
So,
so like in the meeting, everyone sits down with HR.
okay.
And like say if I say something bad about you,
Okay, are we both there
yes,
with HR?
yes.
You're saying the bad thing about
No,
me?
like
with
if I say to HR, but it's on her list, but like
Okay.
we come to the
Oh,
meeting.
okay, so you've had a meeting with HR to say, this Tanya person, 10 terrible things. You,
Yes.
you have that, okay. And now we come back to the meeting. And,
Yeah.
and she's, okay, and we're both there. All right, now what happens?
So that's my question. So like you said, like with this, if like HR repeats, okay, this is what was happening, it kind of does put me like in a vulnerable place because I know I said that the person sitting right across from me. But like you said, it assumes that everyone is diplomatic.
Yeah.
And
In this context, are we equal power?
yes, so like you would like we have the same job title.
Okay, we have the same job title. So, because my first question is, who is the facilitator who's an internal practitioner? You know, do they have any political interests in favoring one person over the other? And if I had a lot more power than you, then I might be all like, oh, you offended Tanya. So hard. I've seen that happen.
Yeah. But no, like we're
No, you're not.
the
Okay.
same job title. But I think
So you're going to talk about, so you and me are going to talk about it. HR lady has talked to me privately, talked to you privately.
and then everybody brings the list together. And I just want to say, like, the style wasn't very effective. And that, like, the manager, who was the manager at the time of the department, she would personally come to you and be like, oh, write it down, let me know. But then, like, in the meeting, she's just like, this is what you gotta do, and this is how I need it to be done. And I was completely shocked, like.
So there's been a conversation behind your back, but you weren't at, and that you don't have any records of, you don't know what was said about you.
Yeah, it was just like.
What if the other person, what if I was lying about you? What if I wanted to get you in trouble? What if I just, you pissed
Well,
me
that's
off?
that, so
yeah.
because for the organization is unionized, like if that would happen, then we would have like a small meeting and then a union representative would be there. So that like, you have a process for that, but like, this was just like a general concern, like with the front desk department. This is what.
Did it help? Was everything better after this or worse?
It did not really help, well, like.
So was it a waste of time or did it
I
actually make things worse?
think it was a waste of time.
Waste
Because
of
like it assumed that everyone is diplomatic and then like you think that coming together to talk would make the other person hear you and understand, but if the person is an individual. And like,
Yeah.
you can't make somebody do what they don't want. Like you could express how you feel,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's
I mean, just
for
because
people.
I communicate my feelings to you and they're my true feelings doesn't mean that doing that is helpful. Like, let's say I'm really angry and I just accuse you or something. And so you're hearing that information, but what if you're also having a big emotional reaction to the fact that I just attacked you in front of other people? And that's just like, what if you feel so emotionally overwhelmed in the moment you don't know what to say? And then maybe you're reliving this moment, thinking about it later, and you think, damn, I wish I said something else. But in that moment, you were just kind of frozen. So we don't know if these things work or not because we're not really doing studies and collecting data.
But I have like experience that's like style.
So to know, let's say if you're the practitioner, you have to ask the people in that meeting, you know, was that helpful? Why or why not? And be ready to listen if they're all like, that gave me PTSD. There's no such thing as toxic workplace PTSD, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, but I'm pretty sure I've seen with it. Okay.
Yeah, but that was just like our department. There's also been like us in housekeeping, our housekeeping and another department, like kind of let's bring this is your issue, let's sit down, let's talk, but it doesn't really.
So they were maybe coming from the right place.
Maybe, but it doesn't really like you said, it's like, it's not a water coming or like guest satisfaction. And everybody's coming in with their own, I feel.
And
Like,
everyone's
it's
got
not towards to, like, for the organization to be a 5-star hotel this year. We're not really.
Yeah, so sometimes you have to, as the practitioner, you're responsible. Let's say you work for HR for management's supposed to be thinking the good of the whole organization. Then you kind of have to pull people out of the weeds and all get them focused on how to achieve this vision. It should be the shared vision. You can see how that's such like an art and how that could go wrong. And I imagine it'd be hard. You can imagine the life of the HR practitioner can be hard. You have all these conflicts, all these unhappy people. Maybe you don't have the power to do anything about it. Maybe things you do make things worse. Yeah. Friday, tomorrow, is the psychology department's first EDIA conference. It's a big deal. This is organizational development. And I will say it is coming together and happening because of many people working overtime, unpaid, off the side of their desk, outside of their scope of practice to make it happen. So it's pretty cool. And I expect that many things will go wrong since our first time. So Ian and I will be there. You can get a bonus point by writing like a 1-page reflection on one of the sessions. I sent you guys a list, I think. And I might not have sent you the abstracts. Okay. Note to self, send abstracts. Have a quiz on Sunday. I made the deadline for the bonus points thing also be Sunday, just so that it gets done. Another issue I'm dealing with is that I need to use Ian's hours. So I have him for 80 hours. I have to use them. I don't want him to do like 60 hours of work in the last 2 weeks. Because if I want to be a good boss for him, so I need to make that deadline earlier so that he uses that time. And then next class is chapter 12 on goal setting. And sorry, ran a little overtime, so I'll have to go now. But email me if you have any questions, and I will stop the recording there.